Not loud enough, huh? Okay, so let's move right on to the consent items. Do I have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion, second. All in favor, say aye. Those opposed, same sign. All right, let's move on to the action items. The resolution to add FL class investment pool. Laura?
Good morning. Yes, before you, we have Resolution 22-05, which is a resolution approving the entrance into the interlocal agreement with other governmental participants for the purpose of exercising investment power to jointly invest funds in concert with other participants. And what that means is our current investment policy allows us to invest in local government investment pools known as LGIPs. And we currently invest in 2 pools, but we would like to expand that base so that we could have additional pools to invest our funds. We had 2 investments come and meet with the Finance Committee presented at the February 24th, 2022 Finance Committee. They provided us with background information, services, the performance about the pool, and so forth. And we were very impressed with FL Class, and so we're here today to get your approval for that resolution. Any questions?
Do I have any questions? Seeing no questions, do I have a motion to approve?
So move.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. And opposed, same sign. Motion's approved. Let's move on to the president.
I would just like to make the record clear that we had a thorough presentation on this topic a few months ago, and so we were briefed completely on that. So it's not something we're just approving without a briefing. So thank you so much.
Good point. Thanks, Susan. Okay, let's then move on to the presentations, the FY23 budget and forecast. Laura?
Thank you. So we're here today to talk about the current fiscal 23 budget, and we've updated some forecast presentation information. So first, you've got the timeline in front of you, and this is just to remind you where we are with the timeline relative to the budget. So June 1st, 2022, we received the estimated taxable values from the Property Appraisal's Office, and we're here today on June 9th to go over the draft budget as well as the forecast. June 16th, we will be meeting with the Finance Committee to go over any updated items, and we do anticipate having updates between today's meeting and the 16th. July 1 is when we will have to certify our taxable values to the property appraisal, and then we will have another board meeting in July where you will actually approve the fiscal 23 millage rate as well as the preliminary budget. August 2nd was when we have to notify the Property Appraiser's Office relative to the proposed millage rate. And then we've got the 2 trim hearings scheduled, the first trim hearing on September 7th, followed by the final trim hearing on September 21st. And then, of course, our budget will become effective 10/1/2022. So a little bit of history on our millage rate. As you are aware, we have not had a change in our millage of 0.8981 since fiscal year 23. And this table, you've seen this table before, is just showing the history between the prior years relative to the average home taxable value and what the changes has been in that ATV. Next page. This schedule is demonstrating the change over the years of both the budgeted ad valorem revenues and the fund balance information. And so the chart here depicts the solid number versus what I'm going to say the grade number or the light colored number, if you would. It was kind of hard to decide how to show this with different colors. But the solid colors, which is on the bottom part of the bar chart, that represents the ad valorem revenues, and you can see the growth, how that's occurred over the years, with the blue number being the fiscal 23 and the green being projected out. The other number on the top of the bar chart, that is our fund balance that we have budgeted, and you can see back in 2017, our fund balance, or our excess, if you would, was about 18.19 million. That number has slowly increased to where fiscal 22, we were at 42 million, excuse me, on the top part, and going forward, based on our projections, that number is hovering at about 55 million, but we're also showing some increases in ad valorem revenues with anticipation of spending that down. Yes?
I just want to make sure everyone understands, is the fund balance the combination of what we go into with reserves plus lapse from that year?
Correct.
Okay, so it's reserves plus the lapse.
Correct. And so when we budget, when we budget a loss, so to speak, so you're going to have revenues of, just say, 100 million and expenses of 115, you have a loss. But then when you add the lapse back in, you're right, that could bring that loss back up to either a break even or to a positive number, and then that carries over to the next year. That's correct. Next slide. So this is the fiscal 23 budget revenue, and we did receive the updated information from the county relative to the ad valorem numbers. So that increase from the presentation that was made, I believe, back in April, we had an additional increase in ad valorem revenues of 4.1 million. So now our variance between the prior year budget and the current year budget is about $10.6 million. We have made no change on the interest based on the volatility in the market. Our percentage of collections, we've kept that at 97% as well. And I will point out there is a typo on the variance that should be 10.596 for both numbers. On the next slide, please. So this is a budget for our program expenditures, and there's a lot of information on this particular chart. So the program continuation includes COLAs, but I wanted to point out that when you're looking at the workforce stabilization, we have budgeted for next fiscal year 2.550, and I broke that out on this presentation, but to be comparable, the prior year number for fiscal 22 was 3.3 million. But now that number is rolled up into the program continuation and including COLAs because it is now a part of the program. So if you just want to compare those two numbers, the 76.6, excuse me, compared to the 85 plus the 2, you've got about a $10.6 million variance, which is showing that we're budgeting 10.6 more in expenditures between the program continuation and the COLAs and the workforce stabilization.
Laura, just a real quick question. I think we had this discussion when we had our little call. Have you looked at what the adjustment is due to inflation between the years, what was spent versus what dollars were then versus dollars are projected dollars today?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear. Did we look at what?
Did we look at the difference between what was dollars at the beginning of this 2022 versus what inflated dollars are today? Have we looked at the difference between the two?
Yeah,
Or adjusted, or, the adjusted rate?
we've had that discussion, and we really haven't done that
Okay.
yet.
Just wondering what
It's
that
a
might
good
be.
analysis for us to do going forward, but I think it'll be harder than it might sound. And we were trying to get this pulled together, given what we knew about programs. But as we continue to look at millage and we continue to look at what it costs to do what we're already doing, which I think is your point, we need to do that in one place.
Yeah, I just
Here it
want-
shows up in a couple different places.
Right.
It's certainly workforce stabilization is a real life component of that, and our COLAs are a portion of that. Both of those essentially reflect the inflation that we experience, not necessarily just pulling numbers out of the common inflation numbers, but the real inflation we're experiencing.
The only thing I really wanted to make sure is that we're looking at apples to apples comparisons as we look at what we're spending now, what we're projecting to spend, and what's the, what is the impact of that? Are we spending really a lot more, or are we spending really more inflated dollars in the process?
Historically, we have had lapse that's carried forward, and so in the forecast chart, which I'll get to in a minute, it'll show what the lapse amount is, and as Mr. Onks had pointed out earlier, that does roll into the fund balance amount. I did want to point out here that we are in a highly inflationary environment, and so we are continuing to tweak the internal budgets. This is a work in progress, but we had to come before you today, and that's why we have the Finance Committee meeting on the 16th to go over in detail some of those additional changes. We have budgeted in the future programming 5.275. Now, right now, that includes 3.5 million for our letters of intent, the phase 1 that we've gone through. And that included the three strategic areas of early childhood development, prevention of child abuse and neglect, referred to as PCAN, and strengthening community. Now, what we had was an overwhelming response to the LOIs, the letters of intent. We had 30 applications, or 30 that were applied, and it comprised of approximately $12.2 million in program funding. We had 20 of those applications that passed the minimum criteria relative to meeting the requirements and the scoring of a minimum of 65 and so forth. And that brought that number down to approximately 10.3 million. The presentation was made last week to the executive team where we reviewed collectively all of those programs to determine which ones we would like to extend an invitation to move forward for a full RFP. As you're aware, we broke this into 2 phases so that both sides, the agencies as well as the internal staff, didn't have to spend a lot of time on these RFPs when we knew some of them probably weren't going to meet the criteria or meet what we were looking for in our strategic plan. So we are looking at extending an invite to 15 programs, and those dollar amounts that are in the proposed letter of intent is $7.5 million. So to tell you, but the 15 that the way it fell out is we have 8 of those were in the early childhood development arena strategic plan. We had 5 of them that were in the PCAN, the prevention of child abuse and neglect, and we had 2 programs that were in the strengthening community. So as I mentioned, those 15 programs in their initial letter of intent was approximately 7.5 million. So now we've budgeted 3.5, so we will be going back and revisiting that number to determine, if we want to meet the strategic goals going forward, and if we've got the funding available, should we be considering increasing that dollar amount? But at today's point, we have not made that change. We've got meetings and discussions coming up between now and the Finance Committee, and we'll certainly discuss that at the Finance Committee.
Laura, let me just kind of pop
Sure.
in here, and I don't know that this is a direct answer to the question that Mr. McCurrick asked, but we embed some things in here, and you can't always tell what got us from one number to the next. But if you look at this same slide and look at program continuation fiscal year 22 versus fiscal year 23, so 76.7 million going up to 85 million, that variance alone is almost 8.4 million. Now, that's not all COLAs. Some of it would reflect programs that were put into place this last year for a partial year, and now they're going to be in their full year. There are other expansions and tweaks. So I'm not saying that's all inflation, but it is almost 8.4 million in additional programming. If you add that to what you see in workforce stabilization for the fiscal year 23 budget, the 2.5 million, those two together, I think, are a pretty honest reflection of what how much more it costs to deliver what we are delivering today. And that, if you add those together, you're at about 10.9 million. Now, I didn't make this work this way, but interestingly enough, if you go back a page, that's awfully close to, in fact, the projected additional revenue in 23 versus 24. So if you go back one slide, that variance is 10.6 million. So the fact is, we'll have we project we'll have 10.6 million more in revenue, but in program continuation. So I'm not talking even about new programming that will hit during this next year, but continuing next year with workforce stabilization, what we are now providing is about the same number.
And again, that's getting closer to where I was trying to get to, is the fact of the inflated dollars along with the cost of doing business. And it appears, and this kind of shows that, it appears that it's kind of equaling out. So it's not like we've got this huge raise in the future for additional cash for something where it looks like, I'm guessing, and that's why I want to see more, is it really kind of maintaining the level at which we've been at? Not counting the new programs, not counting those things, but just, and that's what I want to make sure I understand. So when we're looking at future budgets, looking at what the future costs are and the impacts to the taxpayers, we need to really understand what is the real impact? How much has it changed? And be prepared that should we decide to reduce those rates, what is it what's going to be impacted?
Correct.
Is that information we can get, basically now in the hearing?
We'll work to do something. I mean, it's going to be analytical and estimates. They're not just easy core numbers, but yeah, we'll work on doing some analysis that might help us all understand, what is continuing the programs we have now. There's a component of it, of course, that would reflect programs that we added during sometime during this last year that then we have a full annualized impact. But I think what I provided just a minute ago is a pretty good true assessment of what it will cost fiscal year 23 to continue the programs that we have, that you all have approved, that are in process or happening in fiscal year 22.
The only other thing before Mr. Bartlett is, obviously with inflation, I think it's important for us to also recognize that inflation is affecting our taxpayers too. So, I mean, we're paying $100 a week to fill up our gas tanks now. And I know we always talk about, oh, well, JWB would only be a $20 savings or whatever now it would be more of a savings if we did a rollback. And, $25 or $30 or $40 it's real money for people, so.
That's why we really need to understand the impacts.
Were these numbers part of our materials? Did I miss them or something? I'm seeing this stuff for the first time, wasn't part of the
Right,
packet.
and that's what the budget forecast, this presentation was not uploaded to Dropbox, that's why we're all turning around to watch it.
I didn't,
So we're
So
seeing it for the first time.
It's
Okay.
not been uploaded. And so I have a couple of other.
this was done and
it-
uploaded several days ago.
It's
on
not
the
in the
website.
current.
I didn't realize that.
Somehow I saw it, now it's not.
Right.
I can't see it, but
I had it, but it's gone.
it's gone.
So it may have been pulled down for editing and then not put up back up. I have a couple
That I
of
did
clarifying questions, and again, it's probably stating the obvious. So what we've just seen is on this slide that's up on the screen is about a little over $10 million to maintain the programs that we currently have. And then when we went back to the last screen, it seemed as if it was an equal to the increased revenues that we can expect. I want to come back to what was just said about the LOIs. And I know this is a work in progress with all of the requests for the additional funding. It would have been nice to have a presentation on that, so we're hearing it. But what I think you said is that we have 7.5 million in requests and only 3.5 million in budgeted allocation for this function. And that many of those requests are coming in the early childhood, is what I understand.
Correct.
A good majority of them, which is a new strategic area for us. And so, again, it might be too soon to have seen just even the numbers on a slide, because it seems to me this is a staff decision until such time you want to come back to us and say, these programs look so good and will advance our strategic plan even quicker, and is this the time to look at some of those reserves to slip some money into that?
Correct.
And so it seems to me the next finance meeting is,
The 16th?
right, and that's the one I'm going to miss.
Yeah, and I think, I have in my CEO report about as much as we can say now. It is this sort of, we have to be respectful of the cone of silence during the process, but I do have for you those kinds of numbers. And Laura quoted kind of the top line, what, if all of the programs that we sort of green lighted to go from the LOI to the RFP It doesn't, and if we found them all to score well, those
Right.
are two big ifs.
Right,
Then it would be closer to 7.5 million, and in our projection.
Right.
We projected it to be roughly half of that.
right. Understood.
And because we've heard from the board a lot of energy around accelerating our implementation,
Right.
particularly of 0 to 3. And as it happened, we couldn't have predicted before, but as it happened, a significant number of the programs that were proposed and have been green-lighted are in fact in that 0 to 3 space.
So the other reason I'm sort of putting this on the table and making issue is looking at a pretty low attendance rate. And as we get into the summer, you know, some of the board members will not be at the table. And so I just didn't know, maybe in your report, Beth, you can give us an idea on timeline on that. Because as we don't meet in August, vacations, travel could take some of the folks away from this table to be fully versed on making what could be, you know, a bit of a strategic decision.
Very good. Also on this slide, we have budgeted the same amount for the capital RFA, request for awards, $1,750,000, or $1,750,000. I've also rolled over $500,000. So for the capital RFA that for current year fiscal '22, I think that we had mentioned earlier that some of the agencies, because of supply chain issues, have already informed us that they may not be able to spend all of the money that they had received from the grant award by September 30. Some of them are purchasing vehicles or elevators or so forth, and they've already put us on notice that, number one, it may not come in by September 30, whereby we would remit those reimbursement funds to them. And number two, in their original request for award on the capital, some of the prices have increased. So we have asked all the agencies to give us an update by the end of this month, June 30th, so that we have a general idea how much we might need to budget going forward. And we have budgeted $500,000, not knowing what that number would be for a cushion in that regard. And then our contingency number, we're leaving that at $1 million as well. On the next slide is our administrative expenses. So we're seeing an increase in the salaries. That includes the cost of living adjustment of 10.2% and an addition of 4 full-time equivalents. We're expecting to add folks in the program finance analyst position, the program evaluator, the procurement and budget department, and somebody in IT. We felt like in order to accommodate all of these additional programs and with the workforce stabilization and so forth, we did need some additional staffing. And the operating is an increase of about $400,000, and a lot of that is primarily from the contractual services coming out of the executive department. But you can see our administrative rate still is hovering around just under 7.5%. So with those increases, we would be at 7.38% on our administrative budget. The next slide is the forecast. Of course, it's very hard to see, and my apologies that you didn't get this in advance. That was my understanding that had been distributed, but I've kind of talked about a lot of the numbers that are on here. So the beginning balance is what is being carried forward from the fund balance from the prior year. So if you're looking at the column for fiscal year '23, that's a $53.1 million fund balance carryover. So that's what's coming into the year. Yes?
So just to clarify, so that red number that says revenue minus expenditures projected lapse, that's actually money that's coming back into the next year's budget. That's cash that's coming into the next year's budget.
It would be the number below the red number. The red number is the loss. Yeah, so the red, it's close, yeah. So that's what I meant when I said that if you take your total revenues minus your expenditures, you were at a negative or a red of 15 million, but when we project what the lapse will be for the end of the fiscal year, it comes in at about 18, so we're almost at a break even.
So we're anticipating a lapse of $20 million in 2025.
Correct, and that's using a rolling average of 16.4% of our lapse.
So what is the reserve, so let's say we go to 2025, what is the reserve with the lapse from that year? What are we looking at? Are we looking at like $100 million of cash that we just have that we're not doing anything with?
You would be looking at 54 million. Correct. And moving forward and projected to fiscal '27, the green highlighted item, which tells you how much our excess reserves would be, is at 26%, with our target policy of 8.3%.
8.3%
Correct.
is the policy.
Correct, and we have been at a much higher rate than that because of a cushion, so to speak.
Yeah, what you start seeing when you factor in lapse, if you look at projected '24, the revenue minus expenditures is about 21 million loss, but then you add back 19.8 and you in lapse, and you get $1 million loss. So what you, and then the next year, because we're not projecting as many new programs in that following year, fiscal year '25, but we are anticipating revenues go up, then that loss, if you will, goes down a bit to 388,000. In other words, it begins to stabilize there, and be, reasonably flat.
It's not really a loss because it's cash that we're putting into the budget.
It's a rollover.
Well, it means we actually expended $1 million more than we brought in during the year. Because the number I just quoted to you does take into account the lapse. So you're right, the 20 million is not a real, 20.9 million, that's not a real cash number, but the loss of roughly $1 million projected would be real cash.
Commissioner Gerard?
Can you just talk about the lapse and what is that? A lapse of contracts?
Lapse would be the difference between the amounts we budgeted and contracted for with programs and what they actually spent and that we reimburse them for. So I would say that the two most significant causes for those gaps are we budget and we provide program budgets to our agencies on a very specific basis. It's not just a pool of money that they can spend in any way they might choose. So if in a given agency, we're funding 15 positions and they can't keep more than 10 filled at any point in time, which is the last year and continuing has been a bigger issue, then the dollar amount associated with those other 5 would in essence would turn out to be lapse. That would be, they would not spend that, we would not reimburse them for that. The other thing we find is as we're implementing new programs, while we try to predict when they'll come online and when the expenditures will occur, we almost inevitably have more lapse in those circumstances because we have to actually give those agencies the budget before, and a contract for the budget before they're willing to begin hiring people, which is understandable. They don't want to be at risk beginning to hire people and not have a contract firmed up. So there's almost always that 1 or 2 month gap, and of course those gaps are worse today than they were 3 years ago.
So are you saying
Okay,
that's
but-
money we owe?
No, it's the difference between the contracts that we've signed with agencies and what they've actually spent, which is what we've actually reimbursed. So it's less money. So it's
It's money that we didn't spend, right?
correct, money we did not spend. So
That we still have.
To Mr. Ong's point, you really have to factor that in to say, from a cash perspective, what do
Correct.
we really expect in any one of these years to spend, which is a different number than the aggregate of our program contracts. It's leftover money. It's it stays in the unassigned fund balance and rolls forward.
So just to, as someone who sat on the other side, as an agency administrator, it was very frustrating because we would sign a contract for X, and then if we had lapsed positions that we couldn't fill, or we didn't fill on a timely basis, or we couldn't just say to Juvenile Welfare Board, hey, we didn't spend that money on the staff that we agreed in the contract. We're going to go ahead and move that money to something else. It didn't work that way. And so staffing is the critical part of the contract to get what Juvenile Welfare Board would contract with my agency, say, Big Brothers Big Sisters. And if we couldn't get that staffing within reason just right, those would be lapsed dollars that we could not get reimbursed for another expense line item. And so that's where it was frustrating. Beth and I had that laugh. I used to have a challenge for our CFO to say, you know, let's not lapse. But many agencies are struggling with staffing issues and not hiring positions. That's why I've been questioning the lapse dollars, because it's frustrating to me if an agency is not managing the contract closely. We don't want them to lose the money, but the point is, it's circumstances outside of their control, and it's money that stays in our coffers.
Yeah.
If that helps.
Well, and can I,
Commissioners,
yeah, I wasn't done, actually. And I would certainly agree with what she's saying about being on the other side. JWB has very strict guidelines about how you can move money around, and basically you can't. So even if you don't have the staff that you thought you did, somebody's doing that job. And there should be some flexibility there to be able to pay somebody else to do that, because it's actual people that you're paying for. It's not even positions, it's people. So you can't even just move somebody over there to do the job, because you're not going to get reimbursed for them. So it is pretty inflexible. At $20 million is a lot of lapse. There was a time when you would be sanctioned for not using all your money. And if you went above 5%, I think it was, you were in trouble. So,
Yeah, we've given the environment in the last couple of years, we sort of backed away from that, from looking at lapse as a failure on the agency's part. Because to a significant degree, everyone in this space is having those same kinds of difficulties. You know, on the other hand, what we are ultimately funding, let's just take an early childhood program, you know, we're looking to serve X number of kids.
Right.
And that's our goal. To get there, you have to have, you know, certain staffing ratios and certain people in place. And if you are short by, you know, X%, you're serving fewer kids. And so, you know, we're not inclined to take that anticipated lapse and say we can use it for something different that doesn't accomplish the same goal. Now, it's not that we never do budget amendments. We do. But you're both right to say we have a really high bar on what those things can be, and they need to be within the spirit of what that original contract was, not some other need that's arisen. You know, gee, our van broke down and we'd like you to pay for that, or, you know, I could give you lots of examples. You know, ... It could be all kinds of things.
so I would certainly understand where you're coming from, but I think it's a failure not only of the agency, but of JWB. If we're lapsing that much money, there has to be some kind of meeting in the middle. I mean, as a funded agency, you know you can't spend that money outside the program that JWB is funding. And like I said, to get the job done, and I'm sure many times that lapse also means that you did get the job done, but you managed to somehow get it done somewhere else, somehow, some other way, because JWB wasn't particularly helping. And I would encourage staff to look at the inflexibility there. And, you know, if the job is being performed, then there should be some flexibility to move money from one person to another person, even temporarily. So.
I see you've got your light on. You have another question?
Thank you. Just one more time, and I don't mean to prolong this. I'm just having a little trouble grasping the concept, I guess. But so if you budget $3 million to XYZ to be spent that year, they spend $2 million, there's an extra $1 million. Okay, so they're beyond their contract rate, they didn't fulfill it, so they didn't, that's it. The next year we move on, where does this $1 million go?
Into our reserves.
It goes back into fund balance.
So that number that says total unassigned fund balance, that says 26 million is what we budgeted for 2021, and in actuality, we have 45 million. That's largely because you've got an $8.5 million lapse, or you're showing these lapses.
What, I mean, it just sits there? We can't
It
do
goes
anything?
into our, it's a saving, it goes into our savings, which is why I'm concerned about it, like really, really concerned about it.
And that's why we make this estimate, so that when you see these numbers, you see that taken into account. You know, we don't just put it over the side and it's not part of what's on this schedule. It does go, it stays in the fund balance and therefore is available for the next year. And,
Correct.
And we budget looking both at the beginning fund balance and at the tax revenues.
Does that have to go back and be budgeted for the X, Y, Z, or can we now reallocate it to something else?
We look at the next year's budget and reallocate, you know, it is not assigned to that particular program. It's, you know, part of our unassigned fund balance along with tax revenues, and we budget, you know, we budget afresh more or less for the next year.
I was just going to add that we used to have a slide, and I don't have it in here, and I'd be happy to resurrect it, which showed the history of the lapse over the past several years. And that average prior to the pandemic was about 8.5%, if I remember correctly, and my budget director can correct me in the other room, but it used to be around 8.5%. And when the pandemic hit, we saw that really increase, that lapse amount, because of several reasons. Salaries couldn't be, and staffing couldn't be hired. And we found in fiscal 20 and 21 that they couldn't spend all the money that had been allocated to them for participant expenses. That was a big chunk of a lot of the agencies. They would spend that money on participant expenses. So as a result, that lapse number increased. But to answer your question, your example of the 3 million and you spent 2 and you had 1 left over, what we chose to do in fiscal 21 and 22 and 23 as well is we didn't want to penalize the agencies that didn't spend all of their money and they had that lapse. Prior to the pandemic, we used that lapse percentage as a mechanism to determine what their cost of living would be for the future year. So if you lapsed between 0 and a certain percentage, you got this amount. We went away with that because we felt like the outliers were in place. So in your example, more than likely, we would have probably given them another $3 million in their contract next year based on what they explained to us, why they couldn't spend that money. So we didn't penalize them and take that money away, if that.
You still have $1 million.
Correct. And that $1 million goes into and rolls into your fund balance, which on your revenue chart is your beginning fund balance plus ad valorem, gives you revenue resources available.
Mr. Owens?
And I see my budget director's here. Did I have the right number on the average lapse prior to?
Yeah, it used to range between 6 and 10%.
Between 6 and 10 is what we had normally seen historically in our lapse. So that was a number we were used to. Yes.
So sorry, this will be the last thing I say on this. And my apologies, I wasn't here in March when we first talked about it. I had a land use hearing and we don't get to schedule those. They get scheduled for us. So we gotta be there when we gotta be there. But every time I talk to Beth, we probably talk about the lapse and we talk about the millage rate. And it's something that I have personally been following for years. I was on the board in 2013 when we raised the millage rate. I think we raised it from 0.8, it was either 0.79 or 0.81. I think we may have raised it twice in a row from 0.79 to 0.81 and then to 0.89. And, you know, my recollection of that was it wasn't unanimous and it wasn't intended to last forever. It was intended to help us get through the 2007, 2008, 2009, you know, through that 2012 timeframe and until the economy kind of, you know, got back going. And so, you know, my concern here is if the folks in Tallahassee see that we have $55 million essentially in savings of taxpayers' money that we're not spending or we're not giving back a portion thereof in a tax cut, they're going to do something about it for us, whether we like it or not. And we're probably not going to like it. So we need to either spend that money and keep a reasonable amount of money in reserves and savings, or we need to give a portion of it back in the form of a rollback rate, which is personally what I would like to see. Because when I hear about inflation, and I hear about COVID, and I hear about all this stuff, I say, our people are suffering, right? Our people are suffering, and we have $45 million of their money in a savings account. And we should fund our budget with that and give them a little haircut when they're suffering. So I personally would like to see the rollback rate. And I want to see if we can fund our budget without cutting any programs, without cutting any of the strategic priorities we have, without cutting any money for potential new programs, with dipping into that 45 million bucks. And if we have to raise the millage rate next year because we dipped into the 45 million bucks, we can have that conversation, and I won't say we can't raise it. You know, I voted to raise it in the past, but that's my soapbox.
Well, we will be having the Finance Committee meeting next week, and I know you're a member of the Finance Committee, and I don't know yet if you'll be able to attend that one or not on the 16th. Okay, okay, very good.
But before you move on,
Sure.
I mean, it's a valid question. And I know, oh, Judge, did you have something first?
Yeah, I have one question. I was aligned with Brian, but I think the commissioner hit my point really well that I was running in my mind. And I understand we're not punishing the agencies if they can't, say if it's an employee type of function and they can't hire. As we know, everybody is suffering from that. And yet, as to the commissioner's point, the job is getting done. You know, we may not have the employees to do it, but now my secretary is my secretary, my case manager, and everything else. And I would ask if we just kind of look closely to the agencies that are actually still doing what it is that we've asked them to do without that extra warm body, to see if there is a way with that extra money that we can actually fund them. Because I agree with Mr. Ong's, when you're paying $100 a week for gas, and you know, it is very difficult to even begin to see how we have this money left over. And I know why we have it left over. We have it left over because we want to make sure that the agencies that we fund are adequately funded for the years to come. I just want to look at it with the right lens when I'm making my vote. I want to look at the right lens is that we're not punishing, and punishing is the wrong word. It's not we're overburdening the taxpayers to the detriment of the people that we should be serving, because we're all the community. So I just want to make sure that we get the right information to make an informed decision.
I just want to jump on that same point, because we have two very valid questions that are out there that we need answered. And whether or not we can do it by the 16th or not, I'm not sure. But at least by next board meeting coming up, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that we need to have answers for both questions. And what's the impact? How do we adjust for that? What is, you know, what really do we have? Because we don't want to have what Mr. Onk's just described as a potential that could happen. Let's hope that that wouldn't. But it's a valid point. There's $57 million sitting out there, and we know we have to keep a contingent of some sort. But is it too much? Is it not? The same token, what the commissioner just asked about was, yeah, we stopped penalizing because of COVID and others. I'm hoping we're past that piece of the issue. We're still in, you know, on the verge of whether it's, you know, just inflation, whether it's recession, whether it's depression, all those things in 2008 that we saw could be on the horizon. We don't know, but we better be prepared for it. So I would ask that we be, you know, we have that information readily available. If possible for the 16th, that would be fantastic. But if not, by the next board meeting.
Well, we'll definitely have to have it by the 16th for the Finance Committee, because the July meeting for the board is the meeting that you will be approving the millage.
Right, you
So we
just
certainly
committed
have
to
to have those numbers at the Finance Committee
You
meeting.
just committed to the 16th. Thank you.
I did.
Okay. Any other questions,
I
comments?
did,
Yes.
and I just was going to say that we're supposed to upload today on the website the information for the Finance Committee meeting. So more than likely, it'll be a slip sheet until we get these other items changed. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So I want to add, I think you're right on, everybody's right on track with where we're at. But a couple things we need to consider too while we're thinking about this in the future. First of all, we're a special district. In the event of a natural disaster, such as a hurricane, something that wipes out part of our county, that it wipes out our tax base, we do not get funded back like a city does immediately from FEMA. I can tell you from experience as a special district in the fire department, it took 2.5 years to get funding back from IRMA. So keep that in mind. Without reserves, you're not operating because you're not getting taxes for what's not there. And two, it's my understanding that I was just told, because we were part of the budget, the governor cut $3 billion out of the budget because he expects us to go into a recession very soon. So which is why the state is saving money right now to put away in the event that that happens. So just things we want to consider while we're talking about all the other stuff too. We want to make sure we have that on the table at the same time so we can make a good sound judgment of where we want to go with the money and should we do a rollback or not and things like that.
Commissioner?
Yeah, I would just agree with Mr. Ongst about the fund balance, and it's high. And, you know, it's we don't need that. And I think, you know, all the agencies know it. Anybody who looks at this budget knows it. I think it's time we took that down a little bit.
Okay, so we'll have the information. Yes?
A couple of things. I'm not sure if you can pull it off.
Your microphone.
Sorry, about the cone of silence, with the LOIs and the requests that came in, particularly for early childhood, but would not be talking about anything more probably than additional $3 million. The only thing I know, again, our attendance of our board members changes by the month and by the meeting. We had a huge conversation about our rollback rate at our last meeting. Just, you know, we had this kind of, you know, debate, conversation, and I believed, if we look back in the minutes, we had consensus to say, not happy about it, certainly rolling back the millage rate is something very strong that we should be considering. Yet, the consensus at the last meeting, although it was a vote, because we had to give the staff direction, and we said, not in '23, but we made sure staff understood that we're coming back, and we're coming back with a vengeance to get this done, according to what this next year looks like. This wasn't particularly the year to do it, but I just want the record to go back to the minutes of our last meeting, that we just absolutely had this conversation, and the consensus was, give it one more year before we roll back.
Point well taken. At the same token, and just staying with that, having this information is critical for the support of those decisions, one way or another, but.
So if we go to the next slide, that's where we basically reiterate what you're saying, Ms. Ralston, that the future programming funds are included to complete the implementation of the strategic plan. The recommendation is to maintain the current millage. But we had that discussion, and we were going to consider reducing the millage in fiscal '24, and now we're hearing discussion that we might want to consider that in '23. But we had discussed that, and that was the direction that we were moving in. Mr. Ox?
The only thing I want to add, I think also for the record, is I think we've had this same direction every year for at least the past 3 years, if not more. And every year it's been COVID or something else that we haven't actually done it. So, I mean, I think we've given that almost exact same direction, probably going back to 20 or 19.
Anything else?
No.
Okay, so we'll see that information on the 16th for the Finance Committee meeting, and we can continue our discussions going there. But I think this was a very good discussion that needed to be had, and we need to move on. Okay. School readiness updates. Dr. Fan? Turn your microphone.
Sorry. It's excited to see everyone in person after the long time quarantine at home. So good morning, everyone. And I'm Dr. Chen Fan, the Senior Program Evaluator at the JWB. Today, I'm going to give the board school readiness updates. Next slide, Shannon. School readiness is one of the 6 strategic result areas in JWB. And the focus of the school readiness area is to help children gain fundamental skills and achieve developmental milestones, and the goal is that every child enter into JWB school readiness programs will enter kindergarten ready to learn. And students' school readiness results has been assessed by Florida Kindergarten Readiness Screener. We use this assessment result because, first, this result allows us to compare the programs across JWB school readiness portfolio. And second, that result allows us to set the stage in the context of the county and the state, make comparison, and understand where we are. So for today's presentation, before I jump to the school readiness results, I'll first give the board some contextual information about this portfolio. My slides will be organized into 3 sections. As you can see, the chart on the right will demonstrate the relationship between the 3 sections. I'll first start with a quick overview of the programs and the services and the fiscal year 21 accomplishments. And then I will narrow down to the students we served in this school readiness portfolio. And last, I will talk about the fiscal year 21 school readiness outcomes. Next slide, Shannon. Next. Next one. Yeah. So JWB school readiness programs serve children ages 0 through 5. A variety of services has been provided to the children, as you can see from the circles surround the children. I'm going to talk about those services in detail in the next slide. In fiscal year 21, JWB allocated around $11 to $12 million in this portfolio, and about 3,000, and I can barely read that, 3,564 children and adults were served in this area. And on the right, JWB's school readiness services and the accomplishments were portrayed in a 6-level pyramid. And the services in the bottom down, served as the foundation and infrastructure for the more targeted and intensive services higher up. From bottom to the top, the first level address children's basic needs about health and safety. JWB partnered with Pinellas County Licensing Board to ensure the health and safety for every child who were enrolled in a licensed center and home. And licensing activities conducted, including performing inspection, re-inspection, and processing complaints. The second level is about provider capacity building and teacher quality improvement. Trainings has been provided to the providers countywide free of charge. And providers were learned through those trainings on how to work with children with special needs, like challenging behavior or developmental delays. And also, JWB partners with St. Petersburg College to award scholarships to preschool teachers to help them work toward their associate and bachelor's degrees in preschool education. And the next level, the third level, is about family support. Families and caregivers are our allies. Individual leveled services were provided to the families and the caregivers to meet their own needs and also bridge the gap between home and families. Around 606 caregivers were benefited from those services. The services included referral to the community resources, helping the parents with paperwork, equip them with knowledge and skills to work with children, or help them with the VPK enrollment, a varied kind of services. And also the group-wide parent engagement activities help the parents to build their network with other families so they can learn from each other and help each other. The next level is about access to care. We know families are struggling financially, especially the Alice families. And those are the asset limited, income constrained, and employed families. So those families, we know early childhood education is important, but those families need to get access to care, affordable care. So JWB partnered with Early Learning Coalition and provided scholarships to those families and the children. And so those children can get access to the full day rep care or match care. And the next part is to support children at home and in the school. National Model Program, HIPPY, that is Home Instruction for Parents of Preschool Youngsters. So this model program helps parents to gain some skills to be their children's first teacher at home, to teach children literacy skills at home. And also, we have All Club Special Services Program and Park Family Focus Program to help children with developmental delays and behavioral challenges. One-on-one intervention services were provided to those children to help them be prepared and to be ready to learn. All those individual services were provided to the children and the families free of charge. The top, that is our early learning. So JWB found 11 early learning centers, and the children attended those centers received full-day, year-round early learning education. In addition to those early learning education, those children also receive other services at least one other services we just reviewed before. So this is the whole model of our early learning school readiness services. It takes a village to raise a child. This is our village. In the next section, I'm going to talk about the children we served in this portfolio. That is the top 3 levels, children we served. Next slide. Next. Thank you. So this is the children we served in this portfolio. Those are the unduplicated and children who received the services in fiscal year 21. I picked up the children's enrollment age because for some children, even though the sample was picked up in this fiscal year, but for some children, they may have been enrolled in our program long before this fiscal year. Some children stayed with for 2 years, 3 years, or 5 years. It depends on the level of the service. And the next part, the COI, you are all familiar with COI. COI is the index about the resources children have access to in the community. The lower the COI, the less resources the children have access to. So majority of the children we served, they have very limited resources in the community. Next slide. And as for the children's race and ethnicity, as you can see from the charts, and we are serving a very diverse population in the community, and a majority of those children are minority children. And the next slide is a household and household income. And over half of the children live with a single parent, and about 4% live with relatives or non-relatives. So last month, Dr. Barbara Morrison Rodriguez talked about the grand family efforts, so that can be the part children may benefit from that. And the household income, this field is required but not mandatory when they provide the data to us. So you see around 35% of unknown. But even with the income that is available, we are able to see a majority of the families, they are low income or might be the families living in poverty. So from what we just reviewed, and now we are able to portray the child, a typical child, we are able to see in the school readiness programs. It is a minority child living with low income, or might be a family living in poverty. And this is a family with very limited resources they can get access to in the community. Now, after this one, next section, and we know every year, some children turned to 5 and entered into kindergarten. And for those children, I have the question, we said we are serving the vulnerable population, but when we just look at all children in the context of the county, are we serving those children representative of the Pinellas County population? So my first step is to look at the children's characteristics using the school Pinellas County school categories. And Pinellas County schools use free or reduced lunch as an indicator for low socioeconomic status, and exceptional for children with disabilities. And here, the gifted is excluded, and also children with limited English proficiency. So I look at all children and put them into those categories and compare that to all Pinellas County kindergarteners in those categories. And the orange bar represents JWB participants, and the blue bar represents JWB or Pinellas County, the Pinellas County kindergarteners. And as you are able to see, JWB participants overrepresented those minority groups and those vulnerable groups in relation to free or reduced lunch, exceptionality, and the limited English proficiency. The next step, I'm going to look at those children's race and ethnicity. Now you're able to see again, the orange is JWB, and the blue is Pinellas County schools. And JWB overrepresented the minority group students, especially the Black and African American children. It almost doubled the percentage served in JWB participants. Now, with all those things in mind, and now let's look at the children's kindergarten readiness results. So FLICRS is the test mandated by the state. Every year, in the first 30 days of the kindergarten entry, the kindergarten teachers will assess their children's kindergarten readiness score. And this chart gives you the percentage of the children who were ready for kindergarten. And JWB participants, 49% children were ready. That's very close to the Florida percentage, 50%. And Pinellas County children is 60%. So there's a large gap between JWB participants and Pinellas County's children. But thinking on what we just reviewed, JWB participants overrepresented the low income and low socioeconomic and minority children and children with special needs. So it does not make much sense when we compare JWB participants with overall Pinellas County students. So the next step, I'm going to compare JWB participants with their like group peers. Now, next slide, you are able to see the comparison between JWB participants and their like group peers in Pinellas County schools. Free and reduced lunch, and remember before the gap between JWB and Pinellas County, that was 11%. Now it's narrowed to 4%. And also JWB overrepresented those children receiving free or reduced lunch. And there's a huge drop for children with exceptionality for both JWB participants and Pinellas County participants. For the limited English proficiency, and JWB participants outperformed their like peer groups. And next slide. So when we look at the race and ethnicity comparison, and again, for Black African American children, all across all groups, and for those minority children, and we saw a narrowed gap between those students, especially for Black African American children. And the gap, remember, we double served the Black African American children, but now the difference was only 3%. And again, for the Hispanic children, and JWB participants outperformed the Pinellas County like group peers. Now you may ask me, we reviewed all those data, and did JWB school readiness programs make a difference? And are all children better off? From what data told me, I would say yes. If you recall, we represented, there's an overrepresentation in JWB participants compared to the Pinellas County students in relation to the low socioeconomic status, minorities, special needs, disability, all those categories. However, when we put those children and compare them to the like group peers, we saw a narrowed gap between their achievements. And for the Hispanic children and the children with limited English proficiency, JWB participants outperformed their like group peers. I did another analysis, a statistical analysis, to look at the relationship between JWB service time and the children's school readiness scores. And I found a positive and a significant relationship between JWB service time and the children's school readiness scores. What does that mean? By saying significant, that means this finding is statistically sound. It is not by chance. And positive, that means if the children are staying with JWB for a longer time and receiving services, the longer the services and the better the students' school readiness scores. And so this is just we reviewed about the children's academic outcomes. I wanted to point out JWB impact is not limited to the students' academic outcomes. If you recall the pyramid we just reviewed at the beginning of the presentation, the bottom levels served as infrastructure and a foundation for the children's outcome. And those are the positive impact all investment made on the children in relation to the health, safety, and the social impact. I know we still have a lot of work to do because our goal is every children will be ready for kindergarten. So as we reviewed from the age of the children who were enrolled at the program, and a large portion of the children, when they first received the services from JWB, they were already in the 0 to 3 age group. JWB new efforts to focusing on the 0 to 3 population benefited the school readiness programs. And we found from the data that children with exceptionality tended to have lower school readiness scores for JWB participants and the Pinellas County students as well. And we found that it is important. We realized it's important that children are screened, referred to, and receiving intervention services as early as possible. Last month, the board just approved a new contract to allow us to screen the children with ASQ and the ASQ-SE, have the early screening and the early intervention. So this contract will help us to serve all children better. And there's a large body of research indicates that quality and consistent interactions between teachers and the children are critical. So JWB made a lot of efforts to work toward this goal. And JWB workforce stabilization efforts that allowed us to stabilize our teaching force to keep the consistency for our children. And St. Petersburg College Early Childhood Education Degree Scholarship that allows us to help the children to achieve their professional goal and move their professional achievement to a high level with a higher degree. And the new contract the board approved last month for the early learning program assessment, class assessment, allows us to provide the training, observation, and the coaching to help every teacher who are employed by JWB-funded early learning centers to improve their quality interaction with those children. And those will help us to create a continuous quality improvement for all our children, not just this year, next year, and forever. And so to wrap up my presentation, I picked up 2 quotes from all participants. One is a quote from a mother, and she talked about how she observed the changes she found from her child when participating in the HIPPY program. And the next quote is from a teacher. Because of a JWB scholarship, this teacher became the first college graduate from her family. And that made a significant change, that made a difference in her life. So those are also JWB impact. Now, I'm open the floor to the questions and the comments.
Any comments or questions? Susan?
I thought it was a great presentation, and I acknowledge JWB and staff, all of staff. In the last 4 months, I've seen an uptick, if you will, in the quality of the presentations with analytical data for us. Having said that, I think the data isn't as dramatic of an improvement as we'd probably like to see. But the point that you made is that the children we serve come to us with higher needs, clearly.
Yes.
And so you can't do a apples-to-apples comparison with all of Pinellas County schools, 110,000 students. So I think for me, because of the increased staff in analytical data review, and I'm looking at Barbara, I think we will be able to continue to monitor. And I think your final presentation is there are indicators of what needs to be changed for a more of a dramatic impact, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Thank you, Dr. Fan, for that. That was a great presentation. We appreciate it. Okay, let's move on to the next presentation, which is Reach Out and Read Program Updates and Outcomes. Jennifer?
Good morning. I just want to acknowledge here that this presentation was also worked on by a member of Barbara and Megan's team, Zoe Blair Andrews. She is sick this morning, so she is not joining us. So we are all remaining super flexible, and bear with me while I cover her sections. In this new pandemic world, flexibility is the name of the game. So, good morning. I am Jennifer Artiaga, Associate Manager of Program Administration. We are here today upon this board's request on action taken last September to bring back to you an update on Reach Out and Read's implementation. I want to acknowledge we have Lisa Blair, the President and CEO of the Miami-Dade Family Learning Partnership, with us today, as well as Alix Harper, who's our program coordinator. You also have small books at each of your tables that was provided by the program and also gives a really good kind of high-level overview of the model at a national level. So to start, we really wanted to share more detail about kind of what the program is and what that looks like at a national level, and then we'll talk about our local implementations. So the model of Reach Out and Read is designed to utilize pediatricians, knowing really that those pediatricians are families' trusted advisors, especially as they're bringing home new babies. And the program really looks at doctors and pediatricians using a prescription for reading, if you will, with families embedded in every well child visit for children birthed to 5 years of age. It encourages that reading time and bonding in that relational development. It is the only national program in early literacy that is endorsed by the American Academy of Pediatrics. And it has been evaluated in a number of spaces. We have pulled out 3 outcomes that we feel are very vital and important. And the first being safe, stable, nurturing environments. So by using that time with the pediatrician, with the parent during each of those well child visits, they're talking with them, showing them the importance and really promoting that time together, which helps promote those safe, stable, nurturing environments. We also know that those relationships can help buffer and, build resiliency that then helps buffer later on in life when the children and families experience adversity. Studies have also showed that it enhances the use of developmental screenings in those well child visits. So as the doctor and the pediatrician are speaking with the family, they have that book in hand. They can see, is the child grasping? Is the child saying words? Is the child turning pages? So they're looking and using each of those visits as a developmental assessment tool, if you will, as they're delivering the program. Furthermore, language development is improved. There is a study out of Oklahoma that demonstrated both increases in receptive and expressive language in children who received the service when looking and controlling for like parents' language proficiency or their education. So moving along to JWB's investment. some may recall hearing from Dr. Navsaria at the 2021 JWB Summit. Dr. Navsaria at the time presented as our keynote speaker, where he shared with us the importance of early literacy. Dr. Navsaria also sits on the National Reach Out and Read Board of Directors. It was after his presentation that we actually had a mutual contact who introduced us to Lisa and her team at the Miami-Dade Family Learning Partnership. In conversations with them, we learned they have been serving as the statewide affiliate on behalf of the National Reach Out and Read offices since 2017. We also learned that we had 5 pediatric clinics in Pinellas County who were delivering the service already. Though for a variety of reasons, we're in need of additional supports to kind of wrap around them to ensure the model was being delivered in strong alignment, if you will, with the designed model, the one that was evaluated. And when we do that, we tend to refer to that as model fidelity, but when we have strong model fidelity, then we can more expect those outcomes that we spoke about a moment ago. So the action that was brought to you last September was to do a sole source contract to the Miami-Dade Family Learning Partnership team to the tune of just about over $200,000. That investment is allowing Lisa and her team to wrap around not only the 5 existing sites in Pinellas County, but there was 1 brand new site that was added in the implementation. And that support is allowing them to assist with books, but also make sure the pediatricians are trained, provide any technical assistance that is needed, and then also do that monitoring of that implementation for fidelity to the model. Next slide. All right. So this map provides you a visual of the current participating sites. So the 5 sites that I mentioned that were existing in Pinellas County are the 3 EverHealth locations, also referred to community mental health centers. So there's 3 of those. The John Hopkins, as well as the site at Bayfronts Medical Health Center. The new site that was added is the St. Pete Pediatrics one that is operating out of their Pinellas Park location. When sites apply, they have to actually apply both at the state level and national before they become approved to deliver the service. And they all have to prove certain eligibility. So the state and national offices are looking for clinic locations who have a mission to reach the medically underserved, as well as serving lower income families. So we know that the majority of children and families being reached in these 6 sites are low-income families who are covered by either Medicaid, Florida Kid Care, or actually uninsured. Obviously, looking at the map, there is room to grow further north in Pinellas County, and we're hopeful that as these 6 sites get off and running, that we could look at that in the future. So having talked about kind of the why and the where, we want to shift to really what's been happening since November. So since partnering with JWB, the Family Learning Partnership has provided over 13,000 books to those 6 sites. And that's a critical component of the program and ensures that the pediatricians have those books on hand to be using during the visit, but then also the family is able to take those with them. They've also provided over 36 in-person site visits. So they visit each site on a regular basis, and that's really where that technical assistance and then that monitoring of program implementation can occur. All of the participating pediatric physicians were retrained, and this is vital as well because early on in the model, they started at 6 months. So it was 6 months to 5 years of age. But with new research and knowing the importance of that critical time period when baby is coming home, the model's been revised to start at birth. That actually increased dosage for the families as they have 4 additional well-child visits during that 6-month time period. So everyone's been retrained on the current model guidance from the national office. Additionally, the program has trained over 50 medical residents. We believe that this also helps to create a better foundation, if you will, in those clinics where the medical residents are practicing, but also gives them knowledge and education and experience in the program, that as they move on in our community, they can then take that with them. kind of the last thing to notate on this slide is really just their involvement in Pinellas County. While being from South Florida, they have certainly leaned into our community. They're involved in our Fatherhood Collaborative, connected to grade level reading, and are currently working with the University of South Florida to see how we can partner to also further support those pediatric clinics in the near future. So speaking about reach, thus far, they have touched over 4,800 well-child visits since November. So that reflects the number of actual visits that pediatricians have done with the children birth to 5 since the contract was executed where the program's being delivered. Almost 90% of the population being served is on Medicaid, 47% reporting as Black, 37% white, and then 7% some other race. The emerging outcomes we're seeing, so when we spoke about really looking at the implementation of the program, are they doing it in the way that national office intends and that hopefully gets us to those good, strong outcomes, is fidelity monitoring. So every time Lisa's team is coming to Pinellas County, they are using a site classification tool that is used at the national level to kind of look at that implementation. And it looks at things like the medical providers and their training, books being accessible and being utilized, having literacy-rich environments in those pediatric clinics, and then overall program management. And since November, all of the sites have either improved or maintained their rating on that classification tool. And having done that, the program is on target to meet JWB's contractual measures for fidelity. The program is also overlaid with random parent-caregiver surveys that are provided to parents to kind of get a better understanding post-service delivery, kind of what is actually happening at home. So you can see there are a large portion are reporting that they're looking at the books with their children 3 or more days in the week at 86%. They're receiving the books from the physicians, and then demonstrating at nearly 90% that service delivery is happening in terms of the physician actually talking with the family during the well-child visit. And they are also exceeding, thus far, the targets for parent-child giver surveys. We want to close with allowing you an opportunity to see the program in action. So the video that we're going to show is actually a 4-month well-child visit where the program's being delivered.
Hi, can I examine you a little more? Yeah, let's do that.
I love you, doctor.
Right. Does she like bedtime stories sometimes? Have you tried introducing
I
it?
read to her sometimes, and she really loves it when I read to her.
Great. Well, I think those bedtime stories can be a great way to share books. It's a relaxing part of the night. It's a time where she can be kind of sitting and cuddling you with being close and enjoy the book. You guys can share that.
Yeah.
It's like a quiet way to decompress the day. When changing a diaper, you can think of different ways to distract her too. Just talking with her is such a good thing to be doing. She loves hearing your voice, and even though she isn't yet, are you talking yet? A little bit?
A little bit.
Yeah, she's going to talk more if she hears your voice even more, right? And so we can be talking with the books, and that's a way to practice language, but we can also just be talking together.
All right.
Singing songs, right? What's your favorite one?
Monkey, monkey, monkey.
Well, that singing is going to be really good for you, learning all your words so that you're talking and babbling. We love it. Well, she's really strong. Look how she's already holding her tummy, too. Good work. Yeah. You did great. Besides, you can definitely be showing her the faces.
I see you. Right?
And she's looking back to you to try to figure out what does it mean. Right?
Look on.
She wants to share the book with you.
What is she
Back and
doing?
forth.
See, she's grabbing it.
Yeah, you know what we're supposed to do. I know. You know what we're supposed to do with it. It got frustrating because you couldn't do it. That's okay. I'll see you in 2 months. Okay, beautiful girl?
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, so at this time, we'll open it up to any questions or comments.
Any questions?
Thank you. Very quickly, if I missed it, I apologize. Any plan to get to the north end of our county?
We are certainly hopeful that we can do that. Again, we're just about 6 months in, but the beauty of the partnerships that they have right now, obviously, the community health centers in Everett are key partners, as well as St. Pete Peas, as that is a new site too. There's certainly opportunity to do that, and we're hopeful that we can get there with it, even within the existing pediatric partners, if not, even others.
Check out East Lake Pediatrics. I think they're the only one that takes Medicaid, and is like a large practice in that part of North County. And my wife works there, so.
No plugs, but it's okay.
It's fine as long as she'll do the program and share it with excitement with her partners.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I will note too, just, I think I missed this during the actual presentation, but the investment really is the wraparound, if you will, support. So the pediatric clinics that are delivering it are doing so kind of at their own investment of the pediatrician's time and those kind of things. So that's just always a caveat of the investment. Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Great presentation. The book is amazing. It's beautiful. I specifically like I assume it's a grandfather, and they're a little baby, and that's great to see. So again, thank you so much. Keep up the great work.
Is that the one with the glasses? The little
Yes.
bit. She is as cute as she
Isn't
can.
she
Yeah,
with the little star on her? I mean, it's okay. I won't say anymore. All right, let's move it on to the Chief Executive Officer's report.
I'm kind of circling back to some of what we talked about before, and hope this isn't too repetitive, but we did want to give you the report we could give you on the request for new strategically aligned programs, the letter of intent process, moving to request for proposals. So just to put it in context, at the board meeting on February 10th, you approved a release of the request for new strategically aligned programs for 3 of our areas: early childhood development, prevention of child abuse and neglect, and strengthening community. And we did that in a 2-phase process, which is different than our prior procurements. Phase 1 being a letter of intent that allowed the proposers to describe what it was that they wanted to do, give us basic information about their agency to assure that they qualified with JWB, and then at least an estimated budget. So I want to say 3 or 4 pages, something like that, as opposed to the volume that a full request for proposal is. The idea in doing it this way was to be open to a variety of new and innovative ideas that are aligned with our strategic goals, but took a light touch of effort, if you will, from both the agencies that might be proposing new programs as well as our staff who spend considerable time in the evaluation process, so that we weren't wasting anybody's time with ideas or concepts that just out of the box our folks did not believe were aligned or met good understanding of what kinds of programs, what kind of interventions work in this environment. So the first phase was letter of intent. The second, then, for those green lighted to go forward, would be a full request for proposals, similar to what we would do in other programmatic procurements. So the intent, as we first laid it out, was to fund multiple awards. We had no idea how many we'd get, what dollar amounts we would get. We've mentioned earlier in this meeting the forecast had up to a total of $3.75 million to be effective in fiscal year 23 for new programming aligned with one of these 3 JWB strategic goals. Now, again, on the timing, I'll mention in a minute kind of where we are on evaluating those letters of intent, but the next step for those who are green-lighted to go forward would be a full RFP, and then the schedule is such that their work, our evaluation on a couple of different levels would then come to you, the board, at your December 8th board meeting with our recommendation on programs that we believe should be funded. So, and just to keep in the back of your mind, the board also approved the release of a second solicitation following the same pattern for our other two external strategic areas, school readiness and school success. And those would be in April 2022 in order that, or that was when you approved that, in order for the contract start dates to align with the beginning of the 23-24 school year. So, so we've got schedules you wouldn't believe of, lots of detail with lots of activity and a gazillion meetings between now and when all of these things come to you. The purpose of all of this was to address unmet needs of Pinellas County children and families, do it in an efficient way, and to promote inclusion through new programming that's aligned with our strategic plan. All prospective respondents started by submitting the letter of intent, and then again, if approved, would go forward to the next stage. Respondents were allowed to submit up to 2 letters of intent for new programs that they don't already receive funding for, and each request was required to be a minimum of $100,000. And requests for existing JWB funded programs were not eligible, so expansion or enhancement of a current JWB funded program would be handled separately through our annual budgeting process. And one example of that would be our workforce stabilization effort and opportunity with current programs. So where we are right now is last Thursday, the executive team met to review the letter of intent recommendations from the 3 evaluation teams for these 3 new strategically aligned programs. And from that meeting, things I can't tell you or shouldn't comment on, but what I can tell you are some of the numbers as they roll forward. So there were 30 different letters of intent received. 20 passed the minimum criteria just on their face, and 15 or 50% of the initial letters of intent will move forward to phase 2 and be invited to submit a full request for proposal. Of those 30 LOIs received, that represented 27 different agencies, so a few agencies did propose more than one program. 17 of those agencies had passed minimum criteria, and 14 will move on to phase 2 to be invited. So in other words, 15 letters of intent and representing 14 agencies. And the breakdown by strategic result area, again, this was an open call for letters of intent, so we really didn't have any idea how they would shake out among the 3 areas. But I think not that, all of our strategic focus areas are important to us, but I think we were especially pleased to see a significant number in the early childhood space. So there were 13 letters of intent received, 10 passed the first minimum criteria, and 8, or 62% of those, will move on to phase 2 and be invited to submit a full request for proposal. And the dollar amounts of their initial rough budgets totaled about $3 million. The secondary prevention of child abuse and neglect, there were 9 LOIs received, 7 passed the minimum, and 5 will move on to phase 2, and the total dollar amount represented by those initial budgets was $3.9 million. And then strengthening community, 7 were received, 3 passed minimum criteria, and 2, or almost 30%, will move on to phase 2, and the dollar amount as represented for those 2 programs was about $500,000. So in the letter of intent portion of the process, we had grading just as we always do across the various areas and across at least 3 evaluators, and then all of that came to the executive team. these are all programs that, based on the four corners of the LOI, were scored at least 65 or above. And from this, we can't predict where, where these proposals will land from a scoring perspective with the request for proposal, but if it's anything like the way they were graded for the LOI, we have, we have about $7.5 million in potential new programs that would be aligned with our strategic plan. So just to compare that, it's literally double the 3.75 million that we've had in our projection. And I think we had the question come up within the executive team review of these, so is 3.75 million the magic number? And we'll go, like we do in our capital RFA, we go down until, start with the top scoring program and go down and stop when we've hit 3.75 million, or will we take a look at potentially looking at programs beyond that dollar amount, but that still score above the 65? And I think the executive team felt it was appropriate that if the evaluation teams, I mean, this is not going to happen until fall, but if the evaluation teams and the executive team believed that there were programs worth funding, meaningful for the community, aligned with our strategic goals, that we would bring those to you, to the board, up to whatever dollar amount that was. And you would see, it would be completely transparent, just if you remember the monstrous spreadsheets that we have with the capital request for funding, that you will see program by program, dollar amount by dollar amount, and how they were scored from beginning down. And based on what will probably be somewhat better knowledge about finances and all of the discussion we had earlier about our ability to fund more programs, we will bring that to you so you can see all of that in December with the staff recommendation, but obviously the ability for the board to make whatever decision they believe is most appropriate. One thing that we will be embedding in our thinking is, and I think you heard a little bit of that from Laura when she's talking about the budget, is besides funding the programs, every program we add, it takes some bandwidth at the Juvenile Welfare Board as well. Every program is different in terms of how much time it will take. It's obviously a bit easier to onboard and then manage a program with an agency that has a long history with Juvenile Welfare Board, knows our processes, and already does all of that well. It's also, 5 programs that are $100,000 each are a lot more effort than one program that is $500,000. So it doesn't mean we won't look at smaller programs, but we just have to be realistic about our bandwidth. And part of what you see already embedded in the budget, I think 3 of the 4 positions that we're talking about are really directly related to caseloads, if you will. The number of programs a program manager can handle, the number of programs a fiscal analyst can handle, so that we've been mindful of making sure we had the bandwidth in those areas that absolutely are affected by the volume of programs that we fund. Then I wanted to circle back to a recommendation, or actually a request, that was made back in December 9th of 2021. We presented some updates to our personnel policies in December, and those were approved by the board, but the board also, a motion was made and passed that the Juvenile Welfare Board bring its personnel policies to either a newly formed personnel committee or more likely the existing finance committee to actually have a little bit deeper committee review of our personnel policies. So we intend to do that, and we'll do that. Are we talking about doing that? I didn't have the date at our August meeting, at the August Finance Committee meeting. So just to kind of connect back to that and let you know that we're intending to do that. Board members have asked periodically, how's it going with the FSI, the Family Service Initiative Front Door, now called FSI Connect, being run by PIMS. And while we're not yet up to the point where we're getting all of the data we would like to analyze things, we're incredibly pleased with how well but both the transition has gone and actually how, I'll just say, the Front Door was almost reimagined by PIMS and how well that's gone. So you may remember 211 Tampa Bay Cares terminated their contract with us for the Front Door for Family Service Initiative, and that was effective April 1st. And we didn't have a lot of time to make that transition. 211 was gracious about allowing us appropriate time, so not saying anything negative there. But we needed to get that happening, and PIMS needed to get that happening fairly quickly. They did all of that, a lot of intensive work between our folks and the PIMS folks to make sure that everything was ready. They actually did kind of a soft opening, as it were, about 15 days before the April 1st date. It has, families can access FSI Connect using either a direct number or via a link on the PIMS website for a brief information form. And I think it's fair to say we've all been sort of surprised by the very significant number of families who are choosing to do that short form instead of making the phone call. But both avenues are working very well. So what FSI Connect does is screen and assesses every call for each referral and linkage to our navigation services. And when I say our, really those services provided by either PIMS or Gulf Coast as part of the FSI program, as well as other community services. And so in some cases, the family may receive immediate direct assistance on that first phone call without requiring any navigation services. They need something very specific, and we can make the referral or provide the service immediately, which has never been the case before. Or the navigators and those answering the phones, because it's who they are good problem solvers with the families, particularly if the family doesn't qualify for FSI, or if, in addition to FSI, there are other immediate resources, the families are given those resource information about where they can call. And while the whole world is moving to being able to not talk to a person, but get on a website and find resources, and there are at least 2 databases in our community that have those kind of resources. The fact is, people still matter, and often listening to the subtleties of what's going on with a family by someone who's embedded in the community just works and gets the family to where they need. So in the very first month of operation, there were 329 calls. There were repeat calls, so there were 216 unduplicated folks who were looking for assistance. But interestingly, that's the number of calls, but the number of online forms received was over 150, which I think surprised everybody. So the number of total inquiries were 481, and actual referrals to FSI that fit FSI criteria were about 70. And I think, we need to sort of remember that the Family Service Initiative has always been envisioned, and our criteria and so on are really to help families with a reasonably light touch over a reasonably short period of time. So we're looking at families that have been sustainable but have hit that proverbial bump in the road, not so much those families who are going to need continued deep end assistance. So some of the initial impressions are that the top 3 community referrals were made to what were then accepting referrals, the Our Florida Rental Assistance Program, which is federally funded, the Pinellas County and the City of St. Petersburg Emergency Rental Assistance Program called ERAP, and to various food pantry resources. And so we have assisted a community provider in keeping a pretty robust and updated listing of pantry resources, which we found during the early days of the pandemic changed every other day. Now they're stabilizing a bit, but I think through the pandemic and through our funding of food resources to the pantries, that whole system, if you will, has really deepened and become broader, more available with more food and more appropriate and fresh food, for instance, for people. So there were a significant number of inquiries, obviously, by what the numbers I gave you before, that were beyond the scope of FSI, and as is often the case, about a third of those original online applicants did not respond to the navigator when the follow-up call was made. The staff utilized various methods of communication that were available, including phone, text, email, whatever was provided. And typically, if we received one touch or one request, particularly those online, it was not a one phone call and then we moved on. It was usually multiple follow-up to make sure that we were connecting if a family needed that. Now, the most significant piece, it's not part of the front door discussion, but just a reality in the community, is that the Our Florida program and the ERAP program, that both of which are rental assistance programs that were federally funded via either the state or via the county and the city, have ceased taking new applications. Each of those entities made their best projection on how much money they had left and when they needed to stop new applications in order to not drag people through a process only to not have money to assist them. And so that happened, 10 days to 2 weeks ago. And so needless to say, the number of phone calls where there's just not a good resource to refer them to, that has increased. When we looked at, and we obviously during this entire time have been attempting to, and I think successfully, integrating with other resources that were available in the community. And so if there were federal dollars that families would qualify, obviously that came first. And we've done a variety of things over this 2 years plus of COVID to assist families in connecting to those resources and just filling the gaps with the resources we had. So the navigators that we fund through FSI, for instance, were marvels at helping families get all the different documentation they needed for at least three different sets of programs that supported folks with rental assistance. I thought it was notable that when you looked at the ERAP program, for instance, and you looked at the number of families helped and you looked at the dollar amounts and just divided that to get an average, that the average assistance to each one of those families was about $8,500. So clearly those, a lot of the families being served were catching up with multiple months' rent. We all know that as every residential lease comes due, the new rent number is significantly higher, and even when you're listening to national news, we know that Tampa and Tampa Bay have been in the top, 2, 3, or 5 areas across the country where rents have increased dramatically. So that's just a dynamic that we have in our communities. You combine rental increases that are significant, gas prices that are significantly higher. Some of this dynamic, your best guess is that temporary fixes are not gonna fix this, and there's gonna be some serious dislocation in our community that we're sort of on the edge of assisting, but we will continue to work effectively with the Homeless Leadership Alliance and play our role as HUD funds and other funds play the deeper end role with families that are, that go beyond the scope of what our Family Service Initiative was ever intended to do. So a fun news to provide for you. For the 5th year in a row, the Juvenile Welfare Board Strategic Communications Team was awarded the prestigious Telly Award. I think we have some of them in our hallway out there for the prior 4 years. This year is a bronze award for our fiscal year 21, not this last year, but the year before, annual report video that was titled Restoring Hope. JWB won from a pool of 12,000 entries from all 50 states, from 5 continents, that are in the government, not-for-profit, and non-broadcast category. This was founded in 1979, and the Telly Award showcased the best work created within television and across video for all screens. Telly Award winners represent work from some of the most respected advertising agencies, television stations, production companies, and publishers throughout the world. So we have one person with support from those around her, but our multimedia producer is Gail Kellen Christensen, and yes. Who's over there? Yes, stand up, Gail.
That is a really big deal. I know
It
it,
is.
so congratulations.
And I think we have to get some more space out there to put all your awards.
Yes, we have creative input from April, obviously, as well. And I think what I heard this year from many of you after our annual event, our luncheon, was that the videos that were part of that event were just extraordinary. They communicated well, they touched the heart, they were just exceedingly well constructed and put together. And that they really helped make that event incredibly special. And then some of you may remember, and it's fun for many of our folks to get back to the summer book bus. Part of our JWB's grade level reading campaign and an effort to combat the summer slide or summer learning loss, JWB is once again partnering with Pinellas County Schools to staff the summer book bus. We have 3 weeks. One of them's already passed, but we also have the week of July 5th and July 11th. And within those 3 weeks, there'll be 70 stops at community sites across the county to give away thousands of books to children, and they get the opportunity to come on the bus and with a little guidance and support from volunteers to pick their own books. So we're happy to provide that fuller schedule. If any of you would like to participate in that activity and volunteer, you are welcome to climb aboard and to assist kids and just see their smiling faces when they walk out with a book. So that's what I have, unless there are other questions for me.
Any questions for Beth? Yes.
Yes, so I don't know if this would be the appropriate time, but you did mention the LOIs and the discussions that we're having with the Finance Committee. And it's come to my attention that both Chief Milliken and Susan will not be able to attend the Finance Committee meeting next week on the 16th. So we have most of the committee members here with the exception of Mr. Butler. And I did speak to Mr. Onks before he left, as well as Chief Milliken, and wanted to know if we could move the date, Colleen, to the 22nd, which is a Wednesday. You're not good either way? Okay, but we would have Mr. Onks and we would have Chief Milliken and Mr. McCurrick. Are you available?
Yeah, I will not be there.
And we'd have to check with Mr. Butler. But that would give us more time, and I think it would be good to have those parties there at the meeting.
So you'll send out a correction and date.
Is that all right, Colleen? Can we?
You can move it, it's absolutely fine. We have to get it into the newspaper, by Tuesday, is that correct, Julie? Do they take 8 days before? Yes, so we need it, we have
Okay.
What is the magic number? Because while you're going to gain one, you're losing me, I'm in trial. So you still, I think we're still at an even number of people that can't make it.
Well, we were losing Chief Milliken, who's the chair, and Susan, but I was hoping that you could get here. And then Mr. Onks was kind of struggling whether he would be here or not, but he did say he was open the afternoon of the 22nd. 1:30. But we'll have to check with Mr. Butler. But
We can check and see, make sure we'll have a form for that date and then send out an email. We will need a form there.
okay, thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other comments? All right, then moving on to the information items. Are there any comments or questions?
I'd like to pull item D, and I don't want to belabor the meeting. I don't want it to extend a long time. I do have some questions, if we can answer them in a very brief, concise fashion about Grady. I've seen our program reports and financial monitoring, and I've seen them on a plan for a while, and I've been on this board for a long time, and so I have some history, and so I'd like to get an update on the Grady Neighborhood Family Service Center.
So the Grady Neighborhood Family Center is currently on a corrective action plan. They are on a corrective action plan effective as of April 5th of this year, due to the fact that there were delays in them obtaining licensure. This has been a process over the last several years, working with the organization and PCLB on. Initially, there were questions about the location, if they were going to remain in that location. Then when it was decided they are remaining at the location, there were construction issues, and of course, over COVID, that had some level of impact. They received a number of extensions due to that, and May 31st was their last extension. They did not achieve licensure at that time due to delays in getting background screenings completed. So we placed them on corrective action through the remainder of this fiscal year. They are due to have a licensing visit out there on June 23rd. Michelle McFarland is here. She is the executive director of Grady, but they will have a licensing visit on the 23rd, and we will find out if they will obtain licensure.
Good. And one final question. Has the board been notified?
Yes.
They're fully briefed and informed about the extended extensions and the plan.
So I had a lengthy conversation with their board chair. A letter had been sent to both the board chair as well, or to the board as well as to the executive director. And I know that I will be probably planning to work on getting out there over the next several months after the June inspection date by licensure, and to follow up on all of this.
Any other comments or questions? Michelle, would you like to say anything, or?
Yes.
Would you go to the podium, please? And just turn on the microphone.
Good morning. So yes, so those were actually accurate. We did have quite a bit of delays that were out of our control in terms of our location that was originally going to be licensed. That was changed at the last minute. We were going to go to the Y, but that did not work out. So we did have to make quick changes to renovate the current location. And I will tell you that that was an old building in Rainbow Village that took a lot of work. And, you know, that process did require, of course, bids for all permits, contractors, and everything else that goes into renovating a space. So that did take some time, as well as, you know, having us to move programs, clear out the building, and do all the other things that were required. Once we got that, we were pretty much doing fine. We got all the other required things that needed to be done, any letters, anything from, you know, construction, housing authority, radon testing, all those things, all the staff had all their hours. So really, what happened, you know, you can't check your clearinghouse until after they come out for the inspection. So that did not happen for us until December. And so by that time, around the holidays, we wouldn't have been able to make the timeline because, again, on licensing and staff were out as well for the holidays. So finally, when we were not able to get radon testing until after January. That's the soonest they would be able to come out. So once that was done, we did get access to the clearinghouse, and then we realized that we had a staff person who would not clear. And so we had to address that situation as well. So we had a few setbacks, and most of which were not in our control when we did get the extensions, but that was that. And so now, finally, we did get everything. I actually went out and got my credentials as well. So as soon as that happened, we were in touch with licensing, and we made arrangements so they will be out. So we don't anticipate any other issues around the licensing process. We should be fine.
Expect Karen, you'll keep us up to speed on this, on where we're at.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions? Open agenda. Do we have any comment
We
cards?
do. We have one card from Lisa Blair from the Family Learning Partnership about Reach Out and Read.
Thank you. We just would like to thank the Juvenile Welfare Board for your support on behalf of our providers in the community. And on behalf of the children and families, we want to thank you for investing in Reach Out and Read and making pediatric primary care an integral part of the work that we do in Pinellas County. We want to be embedded in your community, and we wanted you to know that we're here to serve and to be an active part of your community. And thank you.
Thank you very much. Any others? None? Okay, you'll see the future meetings are on the, on your list. May anniversaries, would you like to handle that, Beth?
I will do that. In May, our anniversaries were Julia Bergen, 1 year. Sarah Smith, 1 year. Kelly Grossman, 3 years. Stacy Gill, 3 years. Richard Godfrey, 9 years. And Laura Peel, 29 years.
Wow. Well, congratulations to all for your anniversaries. Are there any other comments or questions? Hearing none, meeting's adjourned. Ooh.
More robust discussion. That's good. I mean,
Well, you understand.